Part 6, Resident Evil 6, released in 2012. Let me just start off by saying Resident Evil 6's Mercenaries mode is fun, and if somebody invites you over for Resident Evil 6 and chill, you should either trick them into playing that mode instead, or skip straight into sucking their dick, Loretta. I don't need to hear about your sister's children, especially not about that one that looks just like me. Usually in these reviews, I focus primarily on gameplay, but the writing in Resident Evil 6 is so bad and so obtrusive to the gameplay that it merits extra attention. Leon Kennedy, who has inexplicably traded his sense of humor for one of Eddie Murphy's old leather jackets, stumbles through a campaign so generic it literally comes in a pack of pho. For no good reason, Leon brings along a woman that isn't really even a person, and I don't mean that in the capacity that women in general aren't people. In this case, I mean that Helena is a glorified plot device. Her role boils down to fucking up enough that Leon has to fix everything, and after hours of bullshitting, to reveal the name of the primary antagonist, who appears so seldom that he might as well not even be in the game. Simmons' boss fights are particularly moronic, as he changes to a bear, to a dinosaur, to some kind of scorpion monster, and then a giant fly over the course of a dozen stages, including vehicle sections and quicktime events, none of which are satisfying since most players won't even know who the fuck he is or why they're fighting him in the first place. Chris Redfield returns following his exploits in Resident Evil 5, watches an intern turn into a burnt Dorito with legs, and is pushed over the brink and into the drink as a result. Then, thanks to the support of professional prostate playmate Pierce, whom is destined to die the moment Chris names him as a worthy successor, Chris pulls out of his depression and continues to eat alone at a shitty bar, all while ignoring Jill's phone calls because the one time that they finally did fuck, Jill jammed her thumb up Chris's booty hole and he liked it a little bit too much. Jake Mueller literally has no reason to exist. He is supposed to be Wesker's bastard son with special antibodies that can create a cure for the new C virus, but children inherit antibodies from their mother, and Wesker wouldn't have even come into contact with the T virus at the time Jake was conceived. The entire concept of him having special blood is made redundant by the presence of his partner Sherry, who not only has special G virus antibodies, but a banging set of titties to boot. A very weak attempt is made to pit Chris and Jake against each other, but their interaction boils down to Chris basically saying, "Hey kid, your dad was the biggest cunt on the planet, and since cunts gross me out, I dropped him into a conveniently placed volcano," and Jake being surprisingly okay with it. Jake seems to exist solely so the developers could include him in a future action game, but at this point in the series with 7 numbered games and a dozen spin-offs, do we really need more characters? Look, Pierce dies, and I can appreciate that, but he was created for Resident Evil 6 just so he could die in place of an established character. He's like one of those illegitimate children Bill Clinton makes with waitresses just so they can be sacrificed to Molech in exchange for 2 more weeks of functioning white blood cells. All the problems solved in Resident Evil 6 are introduced in Resident Evil 6, causing a net gain of 0. The one stab the writers make towards actual overarching plot progression turns out to be a complete bait and switch. If you are a complete fucking retard, you will not notice that there's a second Ada Wong running around in the blue dress. And you might be tempted to believe that Ada actually received some characterizations beyond being a receptacle for testicle projectiles. Instead, a pencil-neck dweeb who's seen too many saucy source filmmaker videos of Ada creates an Ada clone from the living body of a character that otherwise only exists in crib notes, and that clone is the one that fucks over Chris and gets killed instead. It is such a pointless and convoluted plotline that it comes off like a leftover write-up for one of those shitty live-action Resident Evil movies, which I should point out only exists because a Hollywood pedophile was caught importing a child prostitute from Russia and had to concoct an elaborate film career for her to throw the police off of his trail. And no, I am not making that up. Embarrassingly bad writing aside, there is some decent gameplay to be found between the cutscenes and annoying quicktime events. The player now has a regenerating stamina bar which governs the usage of special abilities. The quick shot is a nice addition to the formula, allowing the player to shoot any nearby enemy instantly without aiming in exchange for an increment of stamina. Melee attacks are now independent of the knife, eats up stamina points, and can instantly kill most downed enemies. The weapon upgrading system of previous games is gone. In its place, you get an ability system that restricts you to just 3 upgrades that are generally along the lines of increase drop rate of X items by X%, or Do X% more damage to X type of enemies. Weapons have kick, but there is no penalty for shooting while moving, and backwards strafing becomes a little bit too easy as a result. Boss fights are especially underwhelming since bosses either run away after you've shot them enough times, or will only die following an incredibly convoluted series of quick-time events. At least in Resident Evil 5, when a giant caterpillar bat attacked me in a subterranean low-income housing project, I had the satisfaction of killing it myself. It didn't run away 15 times, only to get killed in a quick-time event where I dropped 5 boxes on it, burn it with lava twice, then shoot it in the face at point-blank range. The addition of player-controlled enemies is a nice addition that ramps up the difficulty in a few places. Most of the fun I had during the campaign came from these moments, where I was either invaded repeatedly by a bunch of Russian assholes, and again when I ruined this one guy's day and refused to let him proceed. AI-controlled enemies, however, are just a little bit underwhelming. A single Crimson Head standing alone at the end of a hallway with his back towards you, staring out of a window and lamenting, is infinitely more unsettling than a dozen screeching C-virus zombies running towards you in a wide open space. The gun-wielding Javo break any sense of tension by sprouting stupid-ass cricket legs and spider butts that are just fucking out of place. The chainsaw enemies in Resident Evil 4 and 5 invoked dread because they were heard before they were seen, and you could never tell which direction they were coming from. The chainsaw would rev in the distance, and you'd only have a couple of seconds to get ready. Typical of most of the special enemies in Resident Evil 6, the Resident Evil 6 chainsaw enemy is introduced via a really stupid cutscene. It jumps right in front of you, it says ooga booga booga, pulled out his dick, and you can't run away from it, and you can't kill it, you gotta fight it like 18 times. It's fucking retarded. Aside from the one titty elemental that has the same scream as the ghoul from the movie House, I can't remember the distinct sound made by a particular enemy in 6, and I just finished playing it yesterday. In contrast, I can still remember the zombie groans from the original PlayStation game, the shriek of hunters, and the distinct thumping of the giant tarantulas. You know what else would have been nice? If you're going to base your game's plot on the idea of a sad boy cloning his dream girls and making monsters by mistake, why don't you make the failed experiments look a little bit like women? Silent Hill 2 had a good success with monsters that resembled busty nurses, a woman with 2 vaginas but no blah 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 hole, and walk-in beds with metaphorical molestation occurring under the sheet. Since there's no theme to the enemies in Resident Evil 6, I could not bring myself to care about them. While having a second person in the room helps cut the suffering in half, I made a point of playing most of the game alone in order to test the balance in the partner AI, and also so I could have my cock and balls hanging out, because most people don't like that. Unfortunately, the AI partner has been dumbed down for the sake of people too stupid to figure out shove his AI, and partner characters no longer take damage, they can't die anymore, they no longer pick up or use ammunition, they will not pick up ammunition and give it to you, but they still ruin the atmosphere by talking constantly. The level layout is generally a clusterfuck, made worse by the poor lighting and the tile sets that make every area on a given map look the same. To alleviate this, the developers put an annoying quest marker on the screen that you cannot turn off, and you can even press a button that puts a literal arrow pointing in the direction you're supposed to go. Often, a quest marker will appear and reveal the location of keys before you even know that you need to get keys. The style of gameplay changes slightly from one campaign to the next. However, since the campaign is all intertwined, you'll wind up in recycled areas with recycled enemies so often that the campaigns begin to blur. Generally speaking, Leon's campaign starts with a fuck ton of really stupid-ass quick-time events, followed by increasingly larger hordes of zombies, then a bunch of bosses that you fight on moving platforms and can only kill via quick-time events. In particular, a fight with a Frankenfish comes to mind, where you fight him on a gigantic slip and slide, and you kill it by shooting a barrel of gunpowder that fell into its mouth out of nowhere for absolutely no reason, and really is closer to you than to the fish, and it should blow you up, but it doesn't. Chris's campaign is a little bit better. It switches between really dull fights between gun-wielding enemies, and some fairly well done segments against giant mutants. Jake and Sherry tend to run out of ammo, and they have an expanded melee option as a result. Unfortunately, they have the most recycled areas that when you play following Leon and Chris's campaign, it'll come off as a bit of a chore, and their exclusive areas are the least polished in the game. Ada in general has the tightest campaign, with the least amount of quick time events, recycled monsters, and god-awful cutscenes. Plus, the only time Resident Evil 6 even attempts to be a horror game occurs at the end of Ada's campaign, And if the entire game had been modeled on that segment style, it would have been terrific. As I mentioned at the start, Mercenaries mode is the best part of the game, as it cuts out all the bullshit and just leaves you with some fun gameplay. No Mercy mode returns even crazier than it was in Resident Evil 5, and if you have the right DLC, you'll even get some characters and monsters from Left 4 Dead 2 thrown in. I would review the other DLC modes, but over the course of a week, I couldn't get a single match up and running, so don't expect to get much play out of them either. Single player matchmaking worked fairly well, and single screen multiplayer functioned for me without a hitch. Overall, Resident Evil 6 feels like somebody dissected a better game and tried to reassemble it in the dark with oven mitts on and their penis out, which is unfortunate for the series as a whole. There are more bad Resident Evil games at this point than there are good, and if Capcom had any sense, Resident Evil 7 would have no connection with previous games. Thanks for your time, and boom, motherfucker!